You didn't go to JCPenney just to buy a shirt. You went to eat. Past the perfume counter, past the racks of polyester, there was a room with vinyl booths and coffee that never stopped coming, and a waitress who already knew your order before you sat down. Everyone remembers the catalog. Nobody wrote down the lunch. 25 plates gone quiet, gone dark, before the stores themselves ever closed. Number 25. The roast turkey plate. At the Auburn Mall in Maine in the 1980s, an advertised special ran $2.99. Turkey, stuffing, gravy poured heavy, a vegetable on the side, and a slice of pie waiting after. Not Thanksgiving, a Tuesday. A family could sit down together on a store restaurant budget and eat a meal that looked, on the plate, like a holiday. Grandma just called it the special, no fanfare attached to the name, even though the meal underneath it was doing more emotional work than its price tag ever let on. Number 24. The open-face hot roast beef sandwich. White bread laid flat on the plate and drowned entirely in gravy. Sliced beef laid across it like a blanket pulled up to the chin, a scoop of mashed potatoes on the side taking the same gravy bath. Eat it with a fork because a fork was the only tool built for the job. Nobody at the table pretended otherwise, and nobody asked for a knife they weren't going to need. Number 23. Chicken a la king. A rich cream sauce, canned pimento cut into small strips for color, a scattering of green peas poured hot over toast points cut clean on the diagonal. One bird, stretched thin across a full saucepan, made to look and taste like it wasn't stretched at all, a kitchen trick disguised as an elegant lunch, and most customers never once questioned how far that single chicken had actually traveled. Number 22. Corn fritters with syrup. Cornmeal batter dropped by the spoonful into hot oil, fried until the edges went dark gold, dusted with sugar, and drenched at the table in syrup that pooled in the little craters left by the frying. It sat on the very same menu as the turkey plate, a side dish with roots running 100 years older than the shopping mall it was finally served inside of. Number 21. Salisbury steak. Ground beef held together with breadcrumbs and finely diced onion, formed into an oval, pan-seared, then smothered in brown gravy until every seam and every filler disappeared from view entirely. Today, a restaurant takes the same working idea, calls the cut-a-hanger steak with jus, and charges $30 for a portion smaller than what a store cafeteria once served for under $2. Number 20. The patty melt. Griddled rye, American cheese gone soft at the edges, grilled onions cooked down slow until they turn sweet instead of sharp. A beef patty pressed flat between the two, held together by nothing but heat and patience. It came off a flat-top grill that had been running since 7 that morning, the same surface that made the pancakes an hour before. Dime store lunch counters served a version of this in the 1960s. And department store cafeterias picked it up right behind them because it cost almost nothing and filled a working man completely. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. A patty melt used to be built to stretch a single burger patty into a full meal, cheap enough that a store clerk on her lunch break could afford it on a register girl's wage. Now it's a diner novelty item with a $5 upcharge for the privilege of nostalgia. That is not progress. That is a working lunch turned into a museum piece. Number 19. Tuna salad on a toasted bun. Canned tuna, mayonnaise, a whisper of celery for crunch, piled high enough that the bun strained to close around it. One woman who ate it decades ago still calls it, without hesitation, the best tuna salad she ever had. And she has eaten in cities with tasting menus since. Not because the ingredients were rare, because someone made it the same way every single day until the recipe stopped being a recipe and became a promise. This was not a sandwich. This was a guarantee that whatever else changed in your day, whatever you were buying or returning or standing in line for, one thing would taste exactly the way it tasted last time. Consistency was the whole meal. Number 18. Egg salad on white bread, crusts left on, no apology for it. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with mayonnaise, and a pinch of paprika on top for color. Nothing more. It cost pennies to make because eggs were the cheapest protein a kitchen could buy, and it filled a stomach as well as anything twice the price. Nutritionally, it held its own. Protein, fat, almost nothing wasted, the shells the only thing thrown away. Grandma just called it lunch. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 17. The chicken pot pie baked in a small individual ramekin, crust golden and cracked open right at the center where the steam had forced its own way out, filled with whatever vegetables were left over in the walk-in that particular morning, carrots, peas, a potato cut small enough to nearly disappear into the gravy surrounding it. Nothing bought special for the dish, everything already sitting in the kitchen, given one more use before it had the chance to go bad and get thrown out for nothing. That was the entire design of a department store kitchen, quietly repeated in every dish on the menu. Nothing purchased that couldn't be stretched into two separate uses, nothing left to spoil on a shelf. Today, a bakery in a gentrified neighborhood sells the same pie, same modest size, for $16 and calls it artisanal comfort food on a chalkboard sign. They knew things about using up a refrigerator completely that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 16. The Friday fish fry. Perch or whitefish, breaded fresh and fried to order the moment it was ordered, never held under a heat lamp waiting for a customer who hadn't arrived yet. In towns along the Great Lakes, the department store cafeteria didn't invent this menu item entirely on its own initiative. It answered to a calendar far older than the mall surrounding it. A Catholic parish calendar that told a large share of the customers walking through the door every single Friday that meat was off the table that day. Full-stop store managers noticed the pattern within the first few weeks of watching what didn't sell on Fridays, and by the 1960s the fish fry wasn't a suggestion tucked at the bottom of the menu board. It was a fixture, printed in the same spot every week without fail, because a business that ignores the rhythm of its own neighborhood does not stay in that neighborhood for very long. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. In 1964, a trade report placed F.W. Woolworth's restaurant sales at $100 million against McDonald's $114 million. And Woolworth was doing it across 1,950 locations to McDonald's 611. Department stores weren't losing to fast food in the 60s. They were the larger machine, feeding more Americans, in more towns, at lower prices, with a waitress instead of a drive-through window. They lost anyway, not to worse food, to real estate math. A department store restaurant existed to hold a shopper in the building long enough to walk past a rack of shirts on the way out. When mall developers realized they could sell that same square footage to a shoe store instead, the restaurant became the first thing cut. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded at something a spreadsheet couldn't measure. Loyalty. A regular booth. A waitress who knew your order. This was not a business decision. This was an entire ritual of American public life, erased one lease renewal at a time, and nobody at the corporate office ever had to explain the loss to a single customer's face. Number 15. Beef stew. Thick enough to hold a spoon standing up straight in the middle of the bowl. It started with chuck, the cheapest cut on the delivery truck, full of connective tissue that would toughen a quick sear and ruin it in a hurry. So the kitchen didn't hurry. Hours on a low flame until every fiber that had once made the cut tough gave up and turned tender instead, until the meat pulled apart under a fork without any resistance at all. Carrots and potatoes went in rough-cut, unpeeled edges left ragged on purpose because a store cafeteria wasn't paying someone to make a vegetable look pretty. It was paying someone to make it stretch. A single pot fed a lunch rush of 40 people off a cost of ingredients that wouldn't have covered 4 steaks. Nothing about the dish was fast. Everything about it was patient and cheap and built to be eaten by a shopper who'd walked in from a cold parking lot with an hour for lunch and not $1 to waste on it. That kind of math doesn't survive on a modern menu. A restaurant today can't charge enough for a bowl of stew to justify the stove time it takes to make one properly, so almost nobody bothers anymore. Number 14. Liver and onions, a dish so ordinary on a 1965 menu it barely needed a description printed beneath it, and so foreign to a diner today it would need a warning label instead. Beef liver, sliced thin, dredged lightly in flour, and pan-seared hot and fast, so it stayed tender instead of turning to shoe leather, laid under a heap of onions cooked down slow until they went nearly black and nearly sweet. It sat on the menu next to the steak at half the price, because organ meat has never carried a steak's reputation, only its nutrition iron. B vitamins and concentrations a burger patty never touches. A cheap cut that a factory worker's wife could put on the table twice a week and know, without ever reading a label, that she was doing right by her family's blood and energy. Nobody orders it now. It sounds like punishment instead of protein, a dish rebranded by decades of distance into something unappetizing rather than something wise. That is not progress. That is a nutrient-dense, budget-built plate, discarded along with the reputation it never deserved to lose. Number 13. Macaroni and cheese baked in a full sheet pan and cut into squares like a casserole instead of spooned from a pot like a side dish. The top layer went crisp and slightly burnt right at the corners, and everyone on the line knew it. The corner pieces disappeared first every single day before the center of the pan was even half gone. Elbow macaroni, boiled soft, folded into a cheese sauce built from whatever block was cheapest at the wholesale supplier that week, breadcrumbs scattered over the top if the kitchen had them to spare, skipped entirely if it didn't. It cost almost nothing per serving to make in bulk, which is exactly why it survived on every cafeteria menu in the country for 30 straight years. A department store didn't need a signature dish. It needed a dish that filled a tray, filled a stomach, and left enough margin in the food budget to keep the whole restaurant running as a loss leader instead of a liability. Macaroni and cheese did that job quietly, without ever once getting credit for holding the entire operation together. Number 12. Baked ham with a pineapple ring pressed on top, glazed with the sugar of its own syrup, a maraschino cherry pinned into the center of the ring with a single toothpick. In the 1950s, a can of pineapple wasn't a garnish grabbed without thinking. It was imported, it was seasonal, in a way fresh pineapple never reached a Midwest grocery, and it carried a small price premium that a family noticed on the receipt. Putting it on top of the Sunday ham was a decision, made on purpose, to mark the meal as different from every other meal that week. A family ordering the ham plate at the store restaurant wasn't just ordering dinner. They were choosing, for 1 hour, to feel like the kind of household that could afford a little shine on the table. Glazed meat, a bright ring of fruit, a cherry that the youngest kid at the table always claimed first. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. That small ritual of feeling a little bit special on a modest income has almost entirely disappeared from how working families eat now. Number 11. Swiss steak, smothered in tomato gravy Swiss steak, a tough, cheap cut pounded flat with the edge of a plate or the back of a mallet until the fibers gave way, dredged in flour, browned hard in a hot pan, and then braised for hours in tomato gravy until a fork went through it without a single point of resistance. The tomatoes weren't there for flavor alone. The acid in them worked on the meat the entire time it cooked, breaking down what pounding and flour couldn't finish on their own, turning a cut nobody wanted into a plate everybody ordered. Kitchens across the Midwest and the South ran this exact technique for decades, in homes long before it ever reached a department store menu, because it solved the same problem every single week on every tight grocery budget. Cheap meat, made tender, made to last through a family of 5 without anyone going hungry. They knew things about turning a hard cut soft that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember, mostly because nobody has the patience left to braise anything for 3 hours anymore. Number 10. Franks and Beans, Franks and Beans, a plate every store cafeteria kept printed on the menu for children and for adults who wouldn't admit out loud that they still wanted it too. Sliced hot dogs stirred through baked beans, sweetened with molasses until the sauce turned dark and thick, salted enough that the dish needed nothing else beside it, no bread required, no side dish necessary, a complete meal in one bowl for less than the cost of a single hamburger patty on its own. It was the cheapest protein pairing on the entire board, and it never once felt like a compromise to the kid eating it, because a kid doesn't know what a compromise tastes like. He only knows what he likes, and what he liked was sweet beans and salty Franks in the same spoonful, eaten at a booth, while his mother finished trying on shoes 2 departments over. This was not the low-budget option on the menu, tucked away in shame. This was the plate a store proudly put front and center, because feeding a family well and feeding a family cheaply were never treated as opposites. Number 9. Chili with oyster crackers. Number 9. Chili ladled thick from a steam table pot that had been simmering since mid-morning, oyster crackers crushed on top by hand at the table, because that was half the fun of eating it. Bean heavy, meat light, built that exact way on purpose. A single pound of ground beef could carry an entire pot of chili if the beans were doing most of the real work, stretching the meat across 40 servings instead of 4. Cost control disguised as comfort food, and nobody at the table ever complained about the disguise, because a good chili doesn't announce its own thriftiness. It just tastes like a cold day getting solved. The little packet of oyster crackers came free, stacked in a bowl by the register, and a regular would grab 3 or 4 packets without asking, because the store never once counted them. That small, unspoken generosity, free crackers, unlimited coffee, a bowl filled to the rim without being asked twice, was the entire personality of a department store restaurant, and it is the exact thing a modern fast casual chain would never allow a manager to give away for free. Number 8. Club sandwich, toothpick speared 3 layers of toast, turkey, bacon cooked until it went nearly stiff, lettuce gone slightly wilted from the heat of the meat pressed against it, held together by 4 toothpicks, with the little cellophane frills twisted on top like miniature flags planted in the bread. It was cut into triangles, always 4, always symmetrical, never sliced carelessly at an angle, and it was the sandwich a grandmother ordered for herself and her grandchild without ever needing to look at the menu, because it was always the order, decided years before the child was even born. One woman remembers it that exact way, decades later, with more clarity than she remembers most of her actual birthdays. Her grandmother, JCPenney, the club sandwich, no discussion needed between them, no menu opened, just a nod to the waitress who already knew. This was not just a lunch order. This was a ritual repeated so many times across so many Saturdays that it became a memory before either one of them ever realized in the moment that it was becoming one. That is the part the food industry never understood about a sit-down restaurant inside a department store. It wasn't selling sandwiches. It was quietly building the exact memories customers would spend the rest of their lives missing. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. A cafeteria plate from 1968. Meat, a starch, 2 vegetables, portioned by a server who'd been trained to fill the plate the same way every time. delivered something modern fast casual restaurants have spent 30 years trying to fake with a marketing department instead of a kitchen. Balance. Not a health claim. Just a plate built out of protein, starch, and vegetable because that's what a full meal was supposed to look like. No algorithm required. They knew things about portioning a meal that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. A drive-through combo today front loads sugar and fat because it's cheaper to manufacture and easier to crave. A cafeteria plate didn't need to be craved. It needed to be finished, and it needed to hold a body through an 8-hour shift on the sales floor. That is not an accident of the era. That is an entire generation of quiet nutritional intelligence, dismissed as unglamorous, and lost the moment it stopped being profitable to serve. Number 7. Waldorf salad with mayonnaise dressing. Waldorf salad. Apples cut into small cubes, celery for crunch, a scattering of walnuts, all of it bound together in mayonnaise instead of a vinaigrette, served cold in a small glass dish set beside the entree. It read as elegant on a 1950s cafeteria menu because it borrowed its name from a hotel restaurant in New York, a name that carried a whiff of sophistication no matter where the dish actually landed on a tray, and in its own quiet way it delivered on that promise. Even built cheap. Even built to stretch. A few apples and a small bag of walnuts, chopped fine and bound in a dressing that cost pennies per serving, became a dish that felt like it belonged at a table with linen on it, even when the table underneath it was formica, wiped down between customers with a rag that had been used all morning. This was not fine dining. This was fine dining's reputation. Borrowed cheap and served honest, and it worked because nobody at the table minded the difference. Number 6. Cottage cheese with canned peach, half cottage cheese with a canned peach half, sitting face up in its own small pool of syrup, a mint leaf on top if the kitchen bothered that day. This was the plate for a woman watching her weight before anyone called it a diet plate out loud, before calorie counting had a name printed on a menu. Cheap, protein forward, unglamorous on purpose, ordered quietly by women who wanted a light lunch without ever having to explain themselves to the waitress. Grandma just called it the lady's plate. It sat on almost every cafeteria menu in the country from the 1950s straight through the 1970s. A small, unremarked upon acknowledgment that not every customer wanted the turkey plate or the beef stew, that a lighter option deserved a place on the board without commentary attached to it. She was right. Everything she knew was right, including the part where a good lunch didn't need to be heavy to be satisfying, and a woman didn't need an app on her phone to know how to eat lightly on a Tuesday. Number 5. Jell-O salad with shredded carrots suspended inside it like it had been frozen mid-fall in a photograph nobody took. It stood in for the vegetable course on more menus than anyone wants to admit today, and it earned that spot honestly. Bright cold, a genuine break from the heavy gravy-covered plates stacked up around it on the same tray. It cost almost nothing to make in bulk. A few boxes of gelatin and a bag of carrots shredded fine enough to suspend evenly through the mold. This was not dessert, no matter how it looked to anyone glancing at it from across the dining room. This was the salad, the official vegetable, printed that way on the menu without irony, and a whole generation grew up believing a shimmering gelatin mold belonged on the same tray as a roast beef plate. It does sound strange now. It tasted, to the people who ate it every week, like nothing was missing from the meal at all. Number 4. Coconut cream pie. Cafeteria style made same day in the store's own kitchen by someone whose entire job was pies, meringue peaked into stiff swirls, and browned under a broiler that had no dial finer than on. A few seconds too long and the whole top scorched, and everyone in the kitchen knew it, and nobody ever admitted when it happened because the slice still sold anyway. Custard filling underneath thick with shredded coconut, a crust rolled by hand that morning, not trucked in frozen from a warehouse 3 states away. A bakery in a gentrified neighborhood today sells the same slice, cut a little thinner, for $9, and calls it Heritage Baking on a handwritten chalkboard sign. In 1975, it came free with the meal if a customer ordered the plate special tucked onto the tray without a second charge, because pie wasn't treated as a treat back then. It was simply how a proper lunch ended, the way a meal wasn't considered finished until something sweet closed it out. Number 3, apple pie a la mode. Apple pie a la mode, a warm slice pulled straight from the case, a scoop of vanilla set on top already starting to slide off the side before the fork ever touched it, melting into the crust in a way that meant you had to eat fast if you wanted the ice cream and the pie together instead of as 2 separate courses. Cinnamon-heavy filling, a lattice crust or a full top crust depending on which cook was working that shift, and nobody complaining either way because both versions disappeared off the tray equally fast. This was the reward plate, ordered after a good report card brought home and shown off at the table. After a new pair of school shoes bought 2 aisles over not 20 minutes earlier, after nothing in particular except a Tuesday that simply needed one good thing in it to feel complete. A parent could afford it without flinching, which meant a parent could say yes without a second thought, and a child grew up remembering the yes far longer than the pie itself. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Everyone talks about the day the catalog closed. The mail order counters shut down for good. The last order form printed and boxed away, the headline written and shared for weeks. But the restaurant closed first, in most stores, years earlier, with no headline written for it at all. No farewell menu printed for the occasion. No last day advertised in the local paper for regulars to come say goodbye. 1 month the cafeteria was there, coffee still hot, the turkey plates still on the board. The next month it was a shoe department. Fluorescent lighting swapped for something meant to sell footwear instead of feed a family, and nobody at corporate ever issued a single statement explaining why. That is not progress. That is a business quietly erasing the one part of itself that made people feel like regulars instead of transactions, and replacing that part with square footage engineered to make the exact same people feel like customers instead, counted, tracked, and forgotten the moment they left the building. Number 2, coffee shop pancakes and eggs, breakfast special the breakfast special, pancakes stacked 3 high, 2 eggs any style the customer wanted, coffee that kept coming whether you asked for it or not, the waitress topping the cup off mid-conversation without breaking stride. In the 1970s, a plate like this ran under $1 in plenty of stores, cheap enough that a retired man on a fixed income could sit at the counter every single morning and never think twice about the cost, never do the math in his head before he ordered. The waitress knew that too, and she'd have the coffee poured before he sat all the way down onto the stool, because his order never changed and neither did his seat. That kind of familiarity doesn't get written into a franchise training manual. It gets built slowly, morning after morning, by a person who chose to remember instead of a system designed to forget every customer the moment they walked out the door and swiped in as a stranger the next day. Number 1, hot fudge sundae. Counter-built the hot fudge sundae, built to order right at the counter in full view of the customer, nothing hidden in a back kitchen. Vanilla scooped first, 2 dips, hot fudge poured over it hot enough that it hardened slightly the instant it hit the cold ice cream. A scatter of chopped peanuts if the kid asked for them, a cherry set on top last, always last, never before, because a sundae without a cherry on top looked unfinished no matter how much fudge sat underneath it. It was the final stop before the register, the thing a kid negotiated for the entire time his mother shopped the housewares aisle 2 departments over, the bargaining chip that made an hour of dress shopping bearable for a 7-year-old with nowhere else to be. Grandma just called it the treat. Not dessert, not a reward system. Just the treat, understood by everyone in the family without a single word of explanation required. She was right. Everything she knew was right, and the counter where it was built no longer exists anywhere in this country. Closing 25 plates. Look back at 3 of them one more time. The turkey special that turned an ordinary Tuesday into something worth sitting down for as a family. The club sandwich a grandmother ordered without thinking twice. 4 triangles, 4 toothpicks, the same exact order every single time she walked through those doors. The hot fudge sundae built by hand at a counter right in front of a child's eyes, at a counter that does not exist anywhere in this country anymore. The women who ran those kitchens weren't filling time until something better came along down the road. They were feeding a working town, 1 plate at a time, on a budget that would embarrass a modern restaurant group into closing its doors within a year. And they did it with more balance, more consistency, and more genuine care than most of what eventually replaced them on that same square footage department stores didn't close their restaurants because people stopped wanting to sit down together and eat. They closed them because a captive audience with nowhere else to eat stopped being profitable enough on a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet has never once cared what a regular customer's booth meant to her. That is the whole story. Not taste, not demand. A ledger closed quietly, with nobody required to explain the loss to a single face in the dining room. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made.